Forecasting Pennsylvania's late spring weather feels like a gamble. This April brought an odd mix of heavy rain and warmth, leaving my lawn looking like a jungle. Typically, I'd hold off until early May to start mowing, but this year I had no choice. Honestly, though, as much as I'm not thrilled about early yard work, I'm glad it's not snowing. Last April, a freak snowstorm blanketed us with 15 centimeters of snow. Given the choice, I'll take mowing over shoveling any day. With tax season behind me, I'm happy to be outside in the fresh air. Our backyard has an unusual layout with a sharp drop-off leading to a small creek and woods. When the house was built, they added fill dirt to level the front with the street, which created a steep slope toward the back. Because of this setup, our basement is fully enclosed in the front yet opens at the back. This design allows me to store my lawnmower and tools without crowding the garage, thanks to double doors I installed in the basement. After mowing, I parked everything and headed upstairs to shower. I'm allergic to freshly cut grass, so rinsing off quickly is a must. As I climbed the stairs, I heard my wife, Sarah, talking from the front of the house, where I'd been working. Her friend's car was out front, so I knew she had company. But their conversation held an urgent tone that made me pause, my hand hovering on the door handle. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm David Ross, though most call me Dave. Back in school, friends started calling me Hogan, after David Ross, the actor from Hogan's Heroes. I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with an accounting degree, earned my CPA, and now lead audit teams at a prominent Philadelphia firm. While it's not thrilling work, it's steady and lets me dive into the financial workings of various businesses. Over time, I developed a skill for forensic accounting, tracking complex financial trails to detect fraud and money laundering. I've even collaborated with the FBI on a few cases, which has earned me some respect in my field. Sarah, on the other hand, carved her own path. She studied political science and business, aiming for law school. We met as freshmen, and the first time I saw her, she left quite an impression. She walked into class with an easy grace, tall and slender, her strawberry blonde hair falling over her shoulders. Wearing a light sundress, she was striking, a mix of elegance and strength. Unfortunately, she didn't sit near me that day, and we weren't in any groups together. It took me 4 weeks to muster the courage to approach her. When I finally did, I opened with a silly joke that, to my relief, made her laugh out loud. After chatting, I gathered the nerve to ask her to grab coffee after class. She smiled and said, "I've been waiting for you to ask." From that day on, we were practically inseparable. In our last 2 years of college, we were together almost constantly. Initially, our parents had reservations, perhaps thinking it was just a college fling. But they soon accepted us once they saw our commitment. After graduation, I landed a position at a reputable accounting firm in Philadelphia with a good starting salary for a recent grad. Meanwhile, Sarah was accepted into the University of Pennsylvania Law School. We stayed in our college apartment, taking on our new chapter side by side. During this time, I started my MBA, funded by my firm, and took SEPTA to save on car expenses. 3 years later, when Sarah graduated, I proposed to her at Morton's Steakhouse in Rittenhouse Square, over a birthday dinner. 6 months later, we were married and starting our life together. Sarah began working as a deputy district attorney in Bucks County, just north of Philly. We found a starter home in Doylestown, a town with good train access that made our commutes manageable compared to battling the infamous Schuylkill Expressway or I-95. With her mom's help, we picked a 3-bedroom house, enough space for an office, a guest room, and our main bedroom. Sarah loved being near her parents, seeing it as a practical advantage for future childcare support. Once we started a family. As an only child, I'd always wanted siblings, so the thought of starting a family was exciting. Sarah and I had discussed kids since college, agreeing to wait until her career was stable. Now, finally, 2 nights ago, we decided to stop her birth control and officially start trying. The thought of being a father filled me with excitement. But as I reached for the door handle, I heard something that made me freeze. "Hogan and I decided it's time for me to get pregnant," Sarah told her friend Rachel, her tone bubbling with excitement. Their loud squeals echoed through the house, reminding me of those strange scenes in nature documentaries where whales accidentally beach themselves, frantic and misplaced. Standing on the stairs, I couldn't help but smile at their shared excitement, which mirrored my own at the thought of fatherhood. But just as I started to turn the handle, a comment shattered my happiness. "This is amazing, Kel," Rachel said, clearly thrilled. "But what about Mark? You know, the situation downstairs?" "Sure," Sarah replied quickly, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Hogan's outside, mowing the lawn." I could almost picture her eyes darting around to make sure I wasn't nearby. After a brief silence, she added, "I already told Mark it's over. He understands." With Grossman stepping down as senator, Mark's focused on his political future. Realizing my wife was having an affair hit hard. The situation felt simple yet devastating. An affair with a married staffer could damage Mark Lewis' career, making him vulnerable. Just 3 sentences were enough to shatter my world. Mark, Sarah's boss at the DA's office, was a 40-year-old widower with a daughter, Emily. After losing his wife, Jane, to breast cancer, Mark raised his daughter alone and poured himself into his career. He was deeply ambitious, and Sarah frequently shared stories of his relentless tactics to climb higher in the political arena. I didn't expect she'd be part of his climb. "So, you're just ending things now? After 6 months, you're calling it quits?" Rachel's skeptical tone sparked anger in me. Rachel was a Penn State classmate I'd known even before meeting Sarah. Despite their friendship, I'd thought of her as my friend, too. Now it was clear I'd been mistaken. "Stop it," Sarah replied, laughing as if brushing off a harmless tease. "You're terrible." Mark was intense, sure, but he's too much. I love Hogan and want to be committed to starting a family with him. Rachel laughed at this, but it wasn't a comforting sound. I could feel a thought forming, bitter and ugly. Why not come home to an unfamiliar car in the driveway and find them together in my own bed? Rage filled me, but I was frozen, heart pounding so loudly it seemed to drown out everything else. "So, just quitting, just like that?" Rachel pressed, chuckling. "Not exactly," Sarah said. "I'll have one final conference with Mark in Pittsburgh next week. It'll be our last time together. I'll miss the closeness, but Hogan and the baby come first." I felt my legs weaken. I knew I couldn't listen to more, but I was rooted in place, unsure of what to do. My feelings for Sarah were tearing me apart, and I struggled to make sense of it all. Suddenly, my business mind kicked in. I needed to approach this carefully, think strategically. I went upstairs, hand shaking slightly as I reached for the door. Inside, Sarah and Rachel were chatting casually over tea. I wondered if guilt was flickering in Sarah's expression, or if I just wanted it to be. "Honey, are you okay?" Sarah's voice sounded almost concerned. I touched my face, realizing I had tears streaming down my cheeks. "Allergies," I mumbled. "Looks like it'll be a tough spring." "Let's get you cleaned up," she replied quickly, her voice oddly bright. "Just leave those clothes by the bathroom. I'll take care of them so they don't crowd your closet. I bought you a new pack of Claritin D. It's in the medicine cabinet." Her tone was gentle, even doting, and for a second, it felt surreal. "Thanks," I managed, retreating upstairs, desperate to think. The following morning was Monday, and I left early for a meeting before she woke up, needing space to process what I'd overheard. The night before, I told her I was turning in early due to allergies, though really I was trying to hide my inner turmoil. Sitting alone in the car, I replayed every word from her conversation with Rachel, knowing my wife had cheated. She claimed it was over, that she wanted to focus on being a devoted wife and mother. But could I believe that? The practical side of me assessed the situation like a risk analysis. On one hand, I wanted to believe her. She seemed committed to ending the affair. Yet I kept wondering, would this happen again? Was she capable of secretly meeting Mark or someone else, leading us to a divorce that would drain me financially and emotionally? As an accountant, I was trained to weigh risks, and this felt no different. My trust in Sarah was broken. People often say affairs are just physical, but that seemed to miss the main point. Sarah had kept this from me, showing no respect for our marriage. A cheater knows the hurt they're causing, or they'd be honest from the start. If Sarah had confessed to me instead of me overhearing, it might have softened the betrayal. Still, I didn't want to confront her without proof. My mind ran through the options. Confronting her now would be pointless, leading only to denial. Mark Lewis would deny everything too, and any legal steps would backfire, as he was well connected in the legal community. Facing him in court would likely ruin me financially. Divorce would mean leaving our home behind, and selling the house would be challenging. With limited equity, selling quickly would damage our credit, a risky move for a CPA. Despite the odds, I started looking for proof. 3 days passed with no results. I scoured Sarah's laptop, searched through drawers and closets, but found nothing. Then, unexpectedly, Sarah invited us to a political event at Mark's mansion. Mark was hosting an announcement party, likely for his Senate candidacy. I hadn't found evidence yet, but the invitation felt too tempting to pass up. Friday arrived, and we drove to Mark Lewis' mansion near Washington Crossing. His sprawling estate was impressive, complete with a backyard horse farm and an extravagant tent set up for guests. It screamed wealth and power, and as we approached, I couldn't ignore the surge of anger brewing within me. There stood Mark himself at the entry, his posture arrogant and welcoming guests as if he were royalty. As a widower, Mark Lewis didn't have a wife to manage hostess duties, so he'd enlisted his 21-year-old daughter, Emily, who stood beside him, greeting guests like a natural. When our turn came, Lewis lit up, directing a beaming smile at Sarah. "Sarah, you've done it. Wonderful job," he said warmly, giving her a chaste kiss on the cheek. Turning to me, he offered a firm handshake. "David, good to see you again. I'd be lost without your wife, though it sounds like I'll have to give her up when you two start expanding your family." He chuckled, adding, "Just loan her back when you're done. No hard feelings." The casual joke felt laced with double meaning. Sarah blushed, and a flash of anger surged through me as Lewis stood there, grinning like he thought he'd gotten one over on me. I caught his hint but stayed calm. "Who knows what the future holds?" I replied, keeping my tone neutral, almost like delivering a clinical audit report. Lewis looked slightly taken aback, while Sarah nudged me, whispering that I was being rude. Lewis moved smoothly to the next guests, leaving us alone with his daughter. Despite my anger, I couldn't help but notice Emily's striking appearance. With auburn hair, a radiant smile, and the graceful features of a young Maureen O'Hara, she was stunning. If Sarah had the refined elegance of a dancer, Emily had the all-American appeal of a swimsuit model, the kind of flawless beauty that photographers usually rely on Photoshop to achieve. Mark Lewis looked like he'd crafted the ideal political family. A respected statesman, a late wife who was practically canonized in the community, and a daughter who was every bit the photogenic, perfect young woman. Emily was Penn State's former prom queen, a business and law student, a former gymnast, and now a cheerleader for the university. Sarah had mentioned that she planned to try out for the Eagles cheerleading squad soon. A widow with a beautiful daughter, Lewis had the perfect public image for his campaign, one that would attract both sympathy and admiration. "David," Emily greeted me with surprising enthusiasm, pulling me into a hug. This was no polite embrace. She held me tightly, her whole body pressing against mine in a way that left me momentarily stunned. "You look amazing. I see why Sarah keeps you all to herself," she teased. "You never make it to any of our parties. Don't overwork yourself. It's bad for your health." She managed to say all this in one breath, her smile dazzling. In an instant, my anger shifted to surprise. I responded with a few polite compliments about her appearance, ready to excuse myself when two things struck me. First, Emily hadn't greeted Sarah at all. Second, what parties was she talking about? Just as I opened my mouth to ask, Sarah swooped in, greeting Emily in a way that ended the conversation and ushered us along to make room for the next guests. As we moved to find a quieter spot, the mystery gnawed at me. Fixing Sarah a drink, I casually asked, "So, what parties was Emily talking about?" Sarah laughed and brushed it off. "She's just teasing, that little brat. Sometimes Mark holds team meetings here. He says he thinks better with a drink in hand, and you never know who might stop by. Emily was probably home a few times when we were here." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Don't spread it around, but Mark let her have a drink before she turned 21. Just Dad spoiling his daughter." A wave of anger swept over me. Was this place where Mark had seduced my wife under the guise of business meetings? Were these gatherings legitimate, or had Sarah lingered for some other purpose, only leaving after everyone else was gone? With Mark's wife deceased and his daughter often away at college, he'd had no reason to book hotel rooms, leaving no visible trail. So, Emily's often at these meetings? I pressed, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah laughed, waving it off again. Oh, no, she was just home a few times when classes got canceled. She likes to tease Mark about his work happy hours. She tugged at my hand. Come on, let's get your young wife a drink. For the next hour, Sarah stayed close to my side. We mingled with some of her colleagues, and several brought up our plans to start a family, mentioning their mixed feelings at the prospect of losing Sarah to motherhood, though they shared our excitement for the future. Oddly, I felt embarrassed. How did everyone know about our family plans? I hadn't expected such personal details to be public knowledge. About an hour later, Mark Lewis called for everyone's attention, his daughter at his side, her expression radiant. He began his announcement with warm gratitude for everyone's support, seamlessly shifting into his campaign speech, officially launching his bid for the Senate seat. Although expected, the news still stirred excitement through the crowd. Local press was there, too. I noticed the newspaper publisher standing nearby, chatting with one of his reporters who was already jotting down notes for what I assumed would be tomorrow's headline. I could sense a collective thrill building, the guests' excitement at being part of something they believed historic. I knew better than to trust any of it. I'll spare you most of the party's details. Under other circumstances, it would have been enjoyable, but with my heart in pieces and my mind racing for proof, I could hardly focus. Roughly 90 minutes after the announcement, Laura Green, the first assistant district attorney, entered, announcing Mark's request to meet with his staff. Though Mark held an elected position, Laura was the office's senior manager, the one who kept things running smoothly. Known for her integrity, she was a respected figure in the legal community. Sarah had taken her current position largely because of Laura, and I respected her deeply as well. Married for over 3 decades to an electrician who built a thriving contracting business, she and her husband seemed to embody loyalty and commitment, values I once believed Sarah and I shared. Sorry for stealing your wife, Hogan, Laura teased, her tone lighthearted. Mark wants to discuss office organization once the campaign is fully underway. With that, she and Sarah left to join Mark, and I found myself drifting from the gathering, seeking solitude by the large pool, far from the buzz of the patio. I settled into a wicker swing chair suspended from chains, shaded and secluded, an ideal spot to think. After barely 5 minutes, my solitude was interrupted by a familiar voice. "So this is where you're hiding," Emily purred as she slipped onto the swing beside me, her little black dress clinging to her tan hips. She managed an air of innocence even with a subtle hint of allure. "You seem troubled," she remarked, studying my face. I hesitated, not about to discuss my wife's affair with her lover's daughter, regardless of how strikingly attractive she was. "It's been busy at the office, lots of audits," I said, attempting to shift the conversation away from anything personal. "Really?" she asked, sounding genuinely interested. "I just finished my last accounting class at university. We studied forensic accounting and law enforcement, and I found it fascinating." Caught off guard by her interest, I surprised myself by nodding. "It's a challenging field," I replied. "It may not sound glamorous, but it's like detective work, uncovering the truth, especially when people try to cover it up." "Not everyone sees it that way," I added, surprised to feel some of my tension ease as Emily went on, describing what she'd found compelling about her studies. I found myself listening closely, impressed. I've met interns who couldn't explain the work as clearly as she could, and focusing on the topic helped ground me, pushing aside my anger and frustration for a moment. "You really enjoyed that course," I observed, noting her genuine interest. She blushed at my compliment, and her carefully composed image softened, revealing a young woman genuinely passionate about the subject. "I even thought about joining the FBI," she admitted, "but Dad insists I go into prosecution or one of his friends' firms. I'm not sure that's what I want." I felt a pang of sympathy, and perhaps a bit of satisfaction at the thought of her resisting Mark's influence. "You should follow your own goals, not your father's," I told her honestly. "I've worked with the FBI when audits exposed criminal activity. They're sharp people," I added, before Emily could respond. Suddenly, Sarah emerged from the shadows. "So this is where you've been hiding," she said, feigning playful suspicion. Emily turned, her bright smile disarming. "We were just talking about Dave's work. We covered it in my accounting class," she explained. "Oh, that's Hogan for you," Sarah replied with a proud smile. "I remember one audit he did where an employee was embezzling funds using their boss's login. Hogan found that some transfers happened while the boss was on a business trip, and the login came from the office. Most people would have stopped when the boss was implicated, but Hogan kept digging and uncovered the truth. He left nothing for the prosecutors to investigate," Sarah said, looking at me with admiration. The moment left me utterly baffled. How could she speak so proudly of me and profess her love while carrying on an affair for half a year with her boss? Seeing my expression, Sarah asked, "What's wrong, dear?" "Nothing," I replied tersely. "Just thinking." "Well, stop it," Sarah teased. "It's a party." She barely paused before adding, "Hogan, you'll never guess what opportunity I've been offered. Mark and Laura want me to handle some administrative tasks so that I'll be all set for maternity leave once your project wraps up. That way, there won't be loose ends when I step away. I'll be reporting directly to Laura." My heart skipped with relief at the thought of Sarah being under Laura's supervision instead of Mark's. But my hope was short-lived. "I'll have to travel occasionally, though," she continued. "I'll deliver documents to Mark's campaign team, so I won't be actively involved in the office work, but I'll get a peek behind the scenes. It's going to be so exciting." My heart shattered all over again. Sarah had spoken about ending the affair to focus on family, but I couldn't shake my fear that, given the campaign trail's allure, she'd stray again. Even if she became pregnant, how could I know the child would be mine? Mark's size and complexion were close enough to mine that, without a DNA test, no one would question it. My anger flared, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time. As Emily engaged Sarah in animated conversation about her new campaign role, I found myself sidelined, which I welcomed. I needed the chance to regain my composure. After tonight, I'd need to start planning my moves. My mind churned, yet I had no clear strategy for counteracting Mark's political influence, until a solution showed up unexpectedly. 2 days later, my assistant announced, "Your 4 o'clock meeting is here." Confused, as I didn't recall scheduling one, I glanced at my calendar, then looked up as Emily entered my office. "Hey, Hogan," she greeted with a smile, her long auburn hair spilling over her shoulders. She wore a sundress that accentuated her legs and a pair of strappy sandals that nearly reached her knees. Her casual entrance left me momentarily speechless. "I hope you don't mind," Emily began, closing the door. "I told your assistant we had a meeting to discuss my career and Sarah's role with my father." I managed a polite nod, rising from my chair. "Of course. Please, have a seat," I said, motioning to the chair across from me as I resumed my own seat. "What's on your mind?" I asked, trying to keep the tone light. The cheerful expression on Emily's face faded as she looked at me intently. "I think you know, Dave," she said quietly. "I saw it in your face when you spoke to my father. I'm sorry he's doing this to someone like you." Her bluntness caught me off guard. What do you mean?" I asked, not entirely certain of her intentions. Emily leaned back, her gaze steady. "I know about the affair," she said, confirming my worst fear in one breath. Shocked, I sat back, speechless. "Did you just find out?" she asked, her voice softened. I nodded, barely managing a response. "I'm truly sorry. How long have you known?" I finally asked, my voice a near whisper. Emily sighed. "About 3 months. I'm not sure when it started, but I stumbled onto them on February 1st. She looked away, recalling the memory. "I came home early that Friday to drop off some things after lunch with a friend. Dad asked when I'd be back, and I said not until after dinner. But my friend got sick, so I decided to come home and maybe surprise him." She paused, eyes darkening. "Instead, I found him and Sarah in the jacuzzi. I managed to take a few photos and a short video before they saw me." My stomach lurched. "You took photos?" I stammered, the idea almost as shocking as the affair itself. As if reading my thoughts, Emily reached into her bag, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it on my desk. "There are photos from that day and others." Dad installed security cameras around the property and some inside. I have access to the feeds with his key fob and password, which are in here too. She added a flash drive on top of the envelope. I stared, realizing Emily had handed me everything I'd need to pursue a divorce and destroy Mark Lewis politically. But why? I asked, my voice barely audible. A shadow passed over her face. I hate him more than you could ever imagine, she said, her tone low, intense. Sensing she needed to share more, I waited, silent. After a moment, she began, Dad met Mom when she was a college student. She came to the U.S. to escape after losing her family in the London dairy bombing. They met when she was assaulted by an ex-boyfriend. Dad, who was an ambitious young prosecutor in the physical crimes unit, handled her case, and a year later, they were married. Emily's voice softened. Mom was beautiful, with her Irish accent and grace. Dad was rising in politics, and she fit perfectly into the role of his supportive wife. They had me a few years later, and Dad decided I'd go far in gymnastics, maybe the Olympics, to boost his image. She looked at me sadly. Do you know how most gymnasts' careers end? I shook my head, surprised by the shift in topic. They call it the 3Bs, breasts, backside, and boys. I was no different, and when gymnastics ended, Dad steered me into cheerleading, pushing me to be the all-American girl. I went along with it, but by 16, I realized I was nothing but a pawn in his plans. She paused, gathering herself. Mom knew who he was from the beginning. He started cheating not long after they married. She tried to stop him, pleaded with him to change, but she felt helpless. As a devout Catholic, she wouldn't consider divorce. Sometimes I wonder if her poor response to cancer treatment was a conscious choice, or maybe she just didn't care to fight anymore. Emily fell silent, her gaze far away. I could see the pain in her expression and let the silence linger. Understanding this was not just her story but her grief. I stayed with my mother at the hospital until she passed. Officially, Dad claimed he'd been in court that day, winning a high-stakes case, even getting a doctor to adjust her time of death. In reality, he was celebrating with his assistant at her apartment. He always paraded Mom like a trophy, the press eating up the story of the heroic prosecutor saving an abused young woman. But in truth, he mistreated her far worse than anyone ever knew. Why are you telling me all of this? I finally asked, feeling unworthy of such painful revelations. Hogan, she replied, voice unsteady. My father. He's not a good man. After Mom died, he hid his affairs until I went to college. Since then, he's been hosting meetings at home, mixing work and charity gatherings as an excuse to see his lovers. I know he's involved with at least 2 other women. One even believes he's leaving his wife for her. She paused, her expression dark. Is that what Sarah's thinking? I asked, both horrified and curious. Emily shook her head. No, Sarah sees it as just fun. They say power is the ultimate aphrodisiac, and Sarah is proving it. I overheard her talking about a senator she and Dad were planning to meet. Her gaze hardened. I want you to end this marriage. I want my father's career destroyed so he couldn't win a seat on the local pet council. I thought about leaking this to the press, but he has too many connections. Together, though, I think we can make them pay. I raised an eyebrow. But won't that complicate your studies? She flipped her auburn hair back. My mother left me a trust fund, untouched. I could pay my tuition and cover an MBA if needed. I'm not worried about money. She hesitated, looking pained. If my mom had so much, why didn't she just leave him and take you with her? I asked gently. Raised Irish Catholic, divorce was out of the question. She held on to her faith until the end, and that's the only reason I don't believe her illness was intentional. Otherwise, she'd have left us both. Emily's honesty was disarming, her pain raw. Her desire to ruin her father's career seemed genuine, and I couldn't shake the feeling she was sincere. If this were a trap, Sarah and Mark could have done worse by dragging me to court. No, this type of revenge came from genuine desperation, the kind I knew well. A plan began to take shape in my mind, but I needed her help with a few things. If she was serious, it would show her commitment to this cause. All right, I agreed, but I don't want to ruin him with photos or scandal. We'll dismantle his influence without the messy fallout of a political scandal. Emily looked taken aback. Why not? She demanded, visibly upset. I raised a hand to quiet her. I'm not saying we won't bring him down, but I'd prefer to take apart his career without tarnishing my own image. I'd like a smooth, low-profile divorce, while we erode his power from the shadows. Emily's expression shifted as she considered my words, a calculating smile emerging. What do you need? She asked. I smiled back. I need his financial records, both personal and campaign. They got Al Capone on tax evasion. I suspect your father's financials will show something. She raised an eyebrow. And if they don't? I shrugged. I have a backup plan. Over the next 3 days, we worked together. Emily installed a keystroke recorder on her father's laptop and home computer, backing up his hard drive in the process. We set up the house security system to sync to a cloud drive I controlled overseas. I avoided tracking Sarah's phone. Emily's evidence was enough. I did, however, activate a GPS tracker intended for parental use on her phone, keeping tabs just enough to avoid any unexpected visits. After Emily's visit, I feigned a groin injury to avoid intimacy with Sarah. The thought of being close to her repulsed me after learning about Mark's other affairs, and I didn't want to risk further humiliation. I also scheduled an STI screening. While initial results came back negative, I knew certain infections could take time to detect. As Sarah prepared to leave for the Pittsburgh conference, her excitement was unmistakable. Despite everything, part of me still loved her. I couldn't trust her, but my feelings lingered. Yet the idea of being intimate after all this was unbearable. On Thursday morning, packed and ready, Sarah waited for Mark and the junior lawyer joining them on the trip. I couldn't help wondering if the young man knew he was being used as their cover. I'll be back Sunday afternoon, Sarah said as she dropped her bag by the door. I sat at the table, coffee in hand, facing away from her. Sarah wrapped her arms around me from behind, her breath close to my ear. I hope you'll feel better soon, so we can focus on the baby, she whispered, a hint of tenderness in her voice that stirred memories of happier times. Fighting back tears, I managed to stay composed. I'll ice it to speed up the healing, I assured her, stroking her hand and kissing her forehead. I wish I didn't have to go, she murmured. I'd rather stay here with you all weekend. Her tone softened as if she meant it, and a part of me almost believed her. You could always tell Lewis something urgent came up, I suggested, half hoping she'd agree. Her expression shifted, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. What's your issue with Mark? She asked. You were rude at the party, and now you talk like you can't stand him. I felt my control slipping but kept my voice steady. Honestly, I've seen men like him before, arrogant, manipulating everyone around them. They pretend to be powerful, but they're just big fish in small ponds, stringing people along. I shrugged, giving her a hard look. If he gets to Washington, he'll be preying on clueless interns within a week. His facade will crumble, and when it does, I wouldn't want to be caught in the fallout. Sarah looked at me, shocked. Though I'd shared these opinions before, I'd never tied them directly to Lewis. I'd probably said too much, but venting was cathartic. Despite everything, a part of me wanted her to know that I still cared, even if trust was shattered. Hogan, that's an awful thing to say about Mark, she protested. He's done so much good for this district. I caught a faint tremble in her voice as she defended him, but the honk of a car horn cut her off. He's here, she sighed, her expression twisting from guilt to annoyance. I'll be back in 4 days, she said as she embraced me, trying to be conciliatory. We'll talk then, okay? She kissed me, her affection mingling with guilt. Take care. I love you. I love you too, I replied, even as I wondered if she truly felt the same. She grabbed her bag, calling a quick goodbye over her shoulder. Farewell, Sarah, I murmured as the door closed. 30 minutes later, I boarded the train, bound for the city. Emily and I had an appointment with the FBI. As it turned out, gathering extra evidence on Mark's corruption wasn't necessary. His embezzlement tactics were clever but standard. Emily and I reviewed the files she'd extracted from his computer at her apartment, finding that he'd stashed around $2 million in offshore accounts, though I couldn't confirm the exact amount without more records. Most of these funds came from obscure donors unlikely to attract IRS scrutiny. However, A few were linked to defendants in dismissed cases or unusually lenient plea deals. The real shock came when Emily uncovered another bombshell. She wasn't Mark's only child. She discovered he had fathered children with two other women, one 3 years before his wife's passing, with an employee, and another 8 months after, with an 18-year-old hospital volunteer. He paid each woman $2,000 monthly as campaign consultants for poll research. Emily's fury was palpable as she processed the betrayal, her red hair seeming to intensify with her anger. By the time Sarah and Mark departed for the conference, Emily and I had sifted through all of Mark's records, unearthing hidden layers of corruption. Questions remained, but we didn't have the resources to go deeper. I documented everything, arranging a meeting with the senior FBI agent I'd previously worked with in the Philadelphia office. Emily joined me to share our fabricated story. She'd found discrepancies while reviewing her father's files for a forensic accounting course, and given my wife's connection to her father, she'd come to me for guidance. Agent Gary, a seasoned professional, sensed there was more to the story but didn't pry. We handed him a neatly packaged case, a corrupt prosecutor aiming for a Senate seat. This was a career boost he couldn't pass up. Afterward, Emily had a late class, so I walked to 30th Street Station alone, contemplating the end of my marriage and everything I'd lost. On the train home, I received a call from Sarah, mentioning a late dinner. She hinted she might not return to her room that night. Distracted, I answered vaguely, mentioning my FBI meeting and hinting that I couldn't discuss it further. "This case seems to weigh on you," she remarked, fishing for details. Feeling reckless, I hinted at corrupt officials, bribery, and scandalous affairs. "Oh, you're no fun," she pouted. "Don't worry, love," I replied. "Your secret's safe with me." Returning home that night, I sat in silence, taking in the reality. A decade-long marriage, undone by betrayal, deceit, and shattered trust. As the sun sank below the horizon, I felt like an observer of my own life, watching it fade. Hours passed before I stirred from this fog, realizing that I needed a change. Mowing the lawn was a strange comfort. Mid-task, a BMW pulled up, and Emily emerged. Her long, sculpted legs in strappy sandals and a toga-like dress gave her a striking presence. Her red hair framed her face perfectly, but it was her gray-green eyes and warm smile that held my attention as she approached. "You're looking better than I expected," Emily remarked, her tone light. "I half expected to find you drowning in a bottle." I chuckled. "I had both thoughts last night, but they wouldn't help," I admitted. She nodded sympathetically, then asked, "Have you seen a lawyer?" I nodded. "I met one Tuesday. The papers should be ready Monday. I took on an audit in Austin and will be there 3 weeks. It might seem like I'm avoiding things, but I don't want to be around when the fallout hits." Emily nodded, understanding the attention that would follow. "Smart move," she said approvingly. "Planning is what you're good at." She grinned, then leaned in conspiratorially. "Here's my plan. We'll finish up here, then I'm taking you out. I've got a swimsuit you'll love." I tried to protest. "I'm still married," I pointed out, "and I don't think I'm ready for anything yet." She just smirked. "You need to blow off some steam," she insisted with a mischievous twinkle. "What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander." I laughed despite myself. She was both teasing and sincere, and it felt good to have company. Later, after freshening up, we headed to a nice restaurant for a late lunch. As we approached the restaurant, I noticed Rachel's car in the lot. For a moment, I thought of suggesting we go elsewhere, but a sudden urge for a bit of payback sparked. Casually, I wrapped an arm around Emily and led her inside. Slipping the owner a tip, I requested a specific table with a view of the restaurant, but still visible from certain angles. "What's this about?" Emily asked with a smile as we Saturday. "Not that I'm complaining." I chuckled, leaning in. "Remember how I told you about finding out about Sarah's affair? Her friend Rachel knew about it. Her car is outside." Emily laughed. "So I'm the other woman?" "I can handle that," she said with a wink, leaning in to plant a soft kiss on my lips, a playful promise. The food arrived, and I found myself genuinely enjoying the moment. Emily's company and her wit pulled me out of the shadows of my mind. "I've never heard numbers sound so tempting," she teased, making me laugh. Just then, I caught sight of Rachel walking by. I nudged Emily, and she glanced over, then stifled a giggle. Leaning in for another kiss, my hand slipped under the table, resting on her leg, feeling her warmth and softness. For a moment, I was lost in the touch until Rachel's shrill voice broke through the air. "Hogan, what the hell are you doing?" Rachel's voice echoed through the room, drawing stares. "And who's this tramp you're flaunting while Sarah's away? I thought you were better than this." Her outrage caught me off guard, but I quickly composed myself, releasing Emily's hand as I turned. "What's your problem, Liv?" I replied coolly. "It's just a bit of fun before Sarah and I settle down and start our family. Could you keep it down? People are trying to enjoy their meal." She looked horrified, but I held my ground. "What?" she managed, clearly stunned. "Oh, come on, Liv. Sarah does the same thing, doesn't she? Probably having a fine time with her boss right now. She's been at it for months. So I figured, why not have my own fun with the boss's daughter?" Rachel looked like she was about to collapse. Emily started to giggle, and I gave her hand a quick squeeze to signal restraint. You know?" Rachel stammered, unable to hide her shock. "Yes, I know. I also know I've played the faithful, clueless husband while my wife has been running around, thanks to the help of a friend I thought I could trust." I kept my tone calm but filled with disdain, and Rachel winced at the edge in my voice. "I just thought," Rachel trailed off, guilt creeping into her face. I couldn't resist a parting jab. "Yes, I know Sarah wanted one last thrill before settling down. What's your issue with me doing the same?" I had no proof that Sarah had cheated before Mark, but sometimes suspicions speak louder than facts. Rachel seemed thrown off, and I wondered if I'd hit a nerve. "Is that true?" she asked weakly. "No, but thanks for confirming it," I replied, watching her face pale. "Leave, Rachel," I said firmly. After a stunned pause, she turned and hurried out, and a moment later, I heard a commotion as she exited the restaurant. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt like a spectator, watching my life fade with the daylight. Hours passed before I broke from this trance, realizing it was time to make a change. Ironically, just as I mowed the lawn, a BMW pulled up. Emily stepped out, her red hair flowing, her sandals lacing up her legs in a way that evoked ancient Greece. A semi-sheer dress clung to her figure, but it was her warm smile and gray-green eyes that held my attention. "You look better than expected," she teased. "I thought I'd find you in shambles." I laughed. "I nearly went there last night, but here I am." She nodded, understanding. "Seen a lawyer yet?" she asked. I nodded, explaining that the papers would be ready Monday. I mentioned my upcoming work trip to Austin, letting her know I'd be out of town during the worst of the fallout. "Smart move," she said. "Planning ahead, like you always do." She grinned playfully. "I'll help you finish up here, then let's go somewhere fun. I even brought a bikini you'll love." I tried to deflect, reminding her I was still technically married, but she was persistent. "You need this," she said with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Besides, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander." Later, after finishing the yard work, we headed to a nearby restaurant. As we approached, I noticed Rachel's car parked outside. I almost suggested going elsewhere, but a sudden urge for payback took over. Casually, I wrapped an arm around Emily, guiding her into the restaurant. After slipping the host a tip, we were seated at a table with a view but enough privacy. "What's this about?" Emily asked with a smile. I leaned closer, explaining about finding out about Sarah's affair, and that Rachel was in on it. "So, I'm the other woman?" Emily laughed, leaning in to give me a soft kiss on the lips. I found myself smiling, unexpectedly enjoying the moment. Our food arrived, and Emily's playful comments made me laugh, pulling me out of my own thoughts. I almost forgot about Rachel until I saw her walking by. I pointed her out to Emily, who stifled a giggle. Leaning in for another kiss, my hand drifted under the table, resting on Emily's leg, feeling her warmth. I was lost in the moment until Rachel's shrill voice cut through the air. "Hogan, what are you doing?" she yelled, drawing the attention of nearby tables. "And who's this tramp you're flaunting while Sarah's away?" Her outrage surprised me, but I kept my composure, releasing Emily's hand as I turned to face Rachel. "What's your problem, Liv?" I replied calmly. "It's just a bit of fun before Sarah and I settle down to have a family. Could you keep it down? People are trying to enjoy their meal." She looked stunned. "Sarah's out there doing the same thing," I continued, "probably having a great time with her boss. She's been at it for months, so I figured why not have my own fun with the boss's daughter?" Rachel seemed to stumble, her expression a mix of shock and anger. You know," she stammered. "Yes, I know," I replied, my tone laced with disgust. "I know that I've been the faithful, clueless husband while my wife, with help from a friend, runs around behind my back." My voice was low but filled with contempt, and Rachel winced at its edge. "Is this true?" she muttered. I saw an opportunity and threw my suspicion out, half hoping she'd confirm it. "Well, thanks for confirming it," I said as her face paled. "Please leave, Rachel." She turned, her face pale, and hurried away. Moments later, a commotion outside signaled her exit. "Well, that was fun while it lasted," Emily laughed. "I wish she'd stayed a little longer." She gave me a look that made me blush, adding, "She's probably on the phone with your wife right now." "Maybe," I agreed, "but it's a 5-hour drive back from Pittsburgh, so I'm guessing she'll be busy until then." We enjoyed our dessert, and I headed home to pack. I collected all my personal belongings, not just what I needed for Austin, planning for the long haul. For hours after encountering Rachel, I locked up the house and left, perhaps for the last time. At a hotel near the Philadelphia airport, I stashed my things in storage, securing a temporary home base. Emily called to let me know she was handling her father's angry messages, and I rebooked my flight to Austin for the following morning. Despite Sarah's repeated attempts to reach me, leaving tearful messages about how I'd ruined her life, I stayed firm. Within days, the fallout from Rachel's outburst began to spread. A local blog covered the gossip, speculating about my relationship with Emily. My comments about Sarah and Mark stirred the pot within the county's political and legal circles. By Friday, a letter arrived from Laura, a senior manager in the DA's office, apologizing for the ordeal. She acknowledged Mark's affairs and claimed ignorance about Sarah's involvement, offering support in seeking legal retribution. It felt like damage control, but I sensed her sincerity. Mark's arrest followed quickly, his downfall dramatic and public. Laura recounted how he was taken into custody at the courthouse, stunned and in disbelief as reporters snapped photos. Mark's allies scrambled, the power he'd cultivated slipping away. Laura expressed regret for the chaos and offered help if needed. My original plan for a quiet divorce unraveled with Rachel's outburst, turning our situation into a media spectacle. Romance, betrayal, and revenge became the headlines, and while I was shielded by my Austin trip, I knew the story was reaching fever pitch. Reporters gathered outside my home and even staked out Emily's campus until school officials intervened. In the end, Mark's guilty plea to multiple charges landed him a 20-year sentence, sparing Emily and me from testifying. Gradually, the media storm calmed, and our lives faded from the spotlight. My divorce proceeded smoothly. Sarah signed the papers, later sending a letter of regret. She acknowledged her mistakes and expressed her remorse before moving to the Midwest to live with her aunt. Uncovering Mark's crimes earned me recognition, and my work in Austin flourished. I even identified a second embezzler on a case that secured my promotion to lead the white-collar crime team. Late nights became a pleasure, especially in the company of my new assistant, a recent college graduate eager to learn forensic accounting. And that promised bikini looked even better scattered across the floor of my hotel room.